Hello, everybody. Welcome to California Invasive Species Action Week. Under the direction of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CISAW aims to increase public awareness of invasive species issues and promote public engagement in stopping their spread. Events such as habitat restoration and invasive plant removal days take place throughout the state from June 1st through June 9th. There's a youth art contest, and for the second consecutive year, UC Agriculture and Natural Resources and the California Invasive Plant Council are partnering on these invasive species lunchtime talks that take place at noon daily from June 3rd through June 7th. I want to quickly interject that there are a lot of organizations working on invasive species issues in California, including our federal partners from USDA APHIS and the U.S. Forest Service, state agencies like the California Department of Food and Agriculture, our speakers for today, CAL FIRE, the Invasive Species Council of California, and California Invasive Species Advisory Committee. Local agencies, NGOs, it's a really long list, and unfortunately, we can't list them all without taking up the entirety of this webinar, so I'll quit there. Our speakers for today are both from the Department of Food and Agriculture. David Pagos is Special Assistant for CDFA's Plant Health and Pest Prevention Services. He also serves as Executive Director of the Invasive Species Council of California and the related California Invasive Species Advisory Committee. He's also a member of the Federal Invasive Species Advisory Committee, which advises the National Invasive Species Council. Dr. Kyle Berkey has been with the California Department of Food and Agriculture since 2017. As the state's primary entomologist, his responsibilities include pest risk analysis, permit review and development, and support of eradication and quarantine activities, among other things. Prior to joining the CDFA, he was a USDA port identifier at the South San Francisco Plant Inspection Station. So with that, I'll turn it over to David and Kyle.
Okay, so I'm going to click through and Dr. Berkey is going to start us off. Go ahead, Kyle.
All right, thanks a lot. And David, you can interrupt me anytime if you want to interject. So yeah, I'm Kyle Berkey. I'm the primary state entomologist, and I will be talking to you today about our experiences with fruit flies over the past year or two. I'll start with just going into what kind of pressure the state faces from exotic fruit flies, talking about the responses that we conducted, against these fruit flies, outreach activities, future activities, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion. Can you hear me okay?
You are good.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so obviously California is immensely important for agriculture. We have over 400 commodities grown, agricultural commodities grown in the state. There's over 500,000 farm workers in California. We produce over 60% of the fresh fruits and vegetables produced in the United States. And many of our important crops are also important fruit fly hosts. So things like grapes, citrus, tomatoes, avocados, those are all important fruit fly hosts, and they're also high value crops in the state. In terms of grapes and some of these other things, we're the primary producer in the country.
And I'll just add that, California is a very unique Mediterranean climate. We have the mountainous desert and the ocean that naturally protect us. But this Central Valley here can grow pretty much anything, 400 different crops. And so it's a national strategic resource that we must protect at all costs. We can't be dependent on other countries for our food production, and you can't just grow what we grow in other states because of the climate and the soils as well.
Yeah, good point. Thanks. So, oh yeah, you're good. Thanks. So every year we find a number of fruit flies. Typically, there's a few that make up the vast majority of flies found. Oriental fruit fly is probably the most important. We typically have, some detection, delimitation, and eradication projects every year for Oriental fruit fly. Mexican fruit fly and Mediterranean fruit fly are probably, you know, the close or distant seconds to Oriental fruit fly. But there's really a handful of species that we can typically expect to find on a yearly basis. This past year, we had some, it was a little bit unusual, or quite unusual actually. There were a couple species, Tau fruit fly and Queensland fruit fly. Those are, I believe they're both Zoogodacus. So those two fruit flies are both Q lure responding, in contrast to Oriental fruit fly, which is methyl eugenol responding. And we had projects, quarantines actually for both of those. So again, last year was a little bit unusual, both in terms of the number of flies found as well as the diversity of flies found.
Yeah, and I just add, you know, the Tau and the Queensland fruit fly were the first quarantines in the United States of America as well. So it's a very unfortunate year.
Yeah, it was a real banner year. Thanks. So, this table just summarizes for each of these commonly or somewhat commonly found fruit flies, what is the total dollar value of the known hosts or the regulated hosts. And one factor you have to consider with this table is that the USDA and in turn the CDFA only consider a crop or a plant to be a host if there's a verified field infestation record. So even if it's found to infest something in a lab or some other environment like that, that doesn't count towards regulation. So this is just the total dollar value of the regulated hosts in California for each of these flies. And the total, you see at the bottom, the total is $25 or $24 billion. That's not a total of each of these figures. It's just the total dollar value of all of the crops in California that are a host to one or more of the fruit flies. So it's a large amount of agriculture that's threatened by fruit flies. Thanks. So in order to protect us from the threat of invasive fruit flies, we have a vast detection network, basically detection trapping. And these traps fall into basically two groups. One hand, we have things like the McPhail traps that attract all invasive fruit flies and also a lot of other things as well, many other flies. And the drawback to traps like this is that you have to sort through a lot of bycatch to find the target tephritid fruit flies that you're looking for. We also have traps that rely on a species or fairly specific male lures. And an example of that would be the Oriental fruit fly Jackson trap. So it's a Jackson trap, a paper trap that has a sticky insert, and it uses methyl eugenol to bring the male Oriental fruit flies into the trap. And it also attracts other things like I think peach fruit fly and some other species. So those aren't species specific, but they're more specific, and you have a lot less bycatch with traps like that. And you can just see here how many traps in total are set around the state just for the purposes of detection. So we have about 100,000 fruit fly traps set all over the state, and this is just our baseline detection network. So it's a lot of people and a lot of money involved in that effort. And the goal of this detection network is to find pests before they infest 1 square mile.
Now, the early detection, rapid response, and just to put this in perspective, we had a call with our friends in Queensland, Australia, and they're working on the Queensland fruit fly project, of course, in Queensland, and they put up, I think it was 3,000 to 4,000 traps throughout their whole area, and we had to reveal that, we have 100,000 traps out, right? It's just a whole different scale here in California.
Yeah, and in their case, they have my understanding is they have a very limited area that they're doing the production in, so they've kind of, shut that area off from from everything else, and they can kind of focus on that. Whereas our agriculture in California is so dispersed. We have the huge Central Valley, we have the coast, everything's connected. In addition, we have a lot of urban centers like Los Angeles where most of these detections occur initially. So the pathways, as we suspect they are, are primarily things like, smuggling fruit, baggage, or e-commerce. So wherever people are, that's where you expect to find the initial introductions. And of course, when you have that in close proximity to agriculture, as a lot of these areas are, that's very high risk. Next slide. Thanks. So in a typical year, what do we find in terms of fruit flies? This is a breakdown by species of fly and just the total finds per year. So in a typical year in California, we find approximately 75 adult fruit flies in traps. So you can see that that's the case, except for in 2020 with the COVID epidemic, we had a much reduced number of flies. We think this is probably related to decreased travel. So you have less passenger travel. That means less passenger baggage, less smuggling of fruit. So we think that's what happened with the big decrease in 2020. And then the other thing you notice is that there's a huge explosion in 2023. So we have, upwards of 900 flies found. And we think, that's partly due to things like a lot of smuggling, a lot of e-commerce, possibly expansion of trade routes in Asia, which could increase risk as well in terms of what we might get or cover, effectively getting fruit from a larger area that way. And the other thing that map showed, or that graph showed, was just the majority of these flies are Oriental fruit flies. Okay, next slide, thanks. So anytime we find an exotic or invasive fruit fly, so again, this is something that is not native to the United States. It is federally actionable. Means that if we find it, we have to do something about it, not just for our own concerns, but because the USDA could quarantine the entire state if we do not. So these exotic fruit flies, anytime we find even a single one of these, we have to set up a delimitation project. So that's a lot of time and money. We have to set up an enhanced delimitation trapping network. So we already have detection networks in these areas. That's why we found the fly in the first case. But now we have to go out and set up, map and set up a whole array of traps, to make that a more dense trapping network. And then if a trigger is reached, in the case of Oriental fruit fly, for urban areas, it's 8 flies within a mile within a life cycle. For agricultural areas, it's 6. So, and it varies for the different species of fly, and it's based partly on the efficacy of the trap, what that might suggest about the density of the population, things like that. So we hit the trigger for eradication. Now we have to set up an eradication project, and that could involve use of insecticides, things like that. And then if we reach a quarantine trigger, now we set up a quarantine, and that's going to involve not just the eradication, but in addition to that, regulating growers, that fall within the quarantine area. Anybody who's unlucky enough to fall within that quarantine area. So you can see here, this is a map of how many projects, and again, that includes everything from delimitation up to quarantine. How many projects in each of these counties occurred in 2023? And as is usually the case, we see that most of them are in Southern California, especially Los Angeles and Orange County. We had some in the Bay Area as well. But the lion's share of these projects is usually taken by Los Angeles and Orange County, these urban Southern California areas. So what's involved? What are we actually doing, during one of these projects? We set up a lot of traps. So let me just move this. Okay. So for example, we set up in 2023 30,000 delimitation traps for all of these projects. That's just to get a better handle on the full extent of the infestation. There's a variety of eradication trapping that occurs. Basically, you know, these two things are not necessarily different. So they're both male attractant technique. So whether you're using methyl eugenol mixed with a waxy matrix and spinosad and squirting that onto telephone poles and things like that, or you're using Q-lure and dibrom or some other toxicant in the Jackson trap, those are both bringing in male fruit flies. And so you could consider them both to be male attracting technique. But basically, you know, we had over 25,000 of these Q-lure traps that were set up, and that was for the Queensland fruit fly and the Tau fruit fly projects. And those are both Q-lure attracted flies. So we set up 25,000 of these traps in addition to all of the delimitation traps that are already set up. And I think this was something like, the rate was something like 1,000 traps per square mile, you know, and these are multiple square miles of area. So an immense amount of work, and these traps have to be serviced regularly, you know, checked for any flies, and the lures and the, you know, everything else has to be switched out. And then in terms of the mat with the Oriental fruit fly or the methyl eugenol attracted flies, we had hundreds of thousands of these splats, you know, placed on trees and poles and things like that. So a lot of work, a lot of hours in the field, a lot of product. You know, this some of this stuff is very expensive. Like I think it's, you know, hundreds or thousands of dollars per gallon, you know, for some of the materials. And then in addition, we actually spray. We do foliar bait spraying for fruit flies. You know, at detection sites, we'll spray shrubs and trees in the area with a mixture of GF1. It's a GF120. It's got spinosad as well as a protein bait. So it's bringing in, you know, immature males that may not respond to methyl eugenol or Q-lure, as well as the females. And the idea is, if flies are in the area, they are attracted to those droplets that are on the plants, they feed on it and die. And then lastly, for Mediterranean fruit fly, we used sterile insect technique. So we already have a program that's ongoing in the LA basin. We release sterile Mediterranean, male Mediterranean fruit flies as kind of a prophylactic preventative approach, right? To try to prevent any incipient infestations. But then in the case of the Los Angeles County Mediterranean fruit fly infestation that we had this year, you know, last year into this year, we enhanced that rate. So we have to get more flies and release them at a higher rate because now we know that we have an infestation. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, and as Kyle alluded to, these are on top of all our detection traps, right? So we have 100,000 plus these 50,000, and each of these traps are touched by a human being, right, on a regular schedule, and then the content has to be screened as well. So you can imagine the labor that's involved with something like this. But again, it's important because of what California produces for the United States of America.
And we also remove fruit in certain projects. So this past the monster Oriental fruit fly project that we had, it was over 500 square miles, I believe, in San Bernardino and Riverside County. This was a huge project, and we removed, it looks like it's about 400 tons of fruit, mostly citrus, from 2,000 properties. So that's like, I don't know, I think that's something like 10 railroad cars full of fruit, you know, the equivalent. We didn't use trains, you know, to carry it, but it's a lot of fruit. And there were a lot of people. This is a bunch of people, you know, different groups. We had to work with, you know, counties and other, you know, groups and professional pickers, you know, they were a lot more efficient at picking the fruit. So we had to work with a lot of people and get help from the USDA as well, just to get all that fruit removed. And it still took a decent amount of time, but yeah, we got it done.
Yeah, the San Bernardino Riverside quarantine is 554 square miles, 283 in Riverside and 271 in San Bernardino, one of the largest projects the CDF has ever undertaken. And yes, it takes a lot of personnel to work on these projects.
And this is just, these two maps show the quarantines that we had. So quarantines are, are different from just an eradication. Eradication, you have to, obviously set up a bunch of traps. You have to conduct the eradication, other methods, spraying, things like that. But when you reach a quarantine, that means that now you have to regulate every regulated entity, anybody who is producing, selling anything regulated by that quarantine, you have to go and sign them onto a compliance agreement. And it's a lot of work. The people that do it are, they work really hard. And so we had a large number of quarantines in 2023 to 2024. You can see where they are here. And you can just see how that Oriental fruit fly quarantine in San Bernardino and Riverside County, it kind of dwarfs the others. And it kind of takes up, it's like the combined area of several of the other quarantines.
Indeed. Yes, and Santa Clara and Sacramento have subsequently finished their quarantine periods.
Yeah, it's always nice when they actually, we can say that it's done.
And that's based on 3 life cycles of no detections.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So some of the outreach response that we've had here, we'll go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so then with the quarantines, what happened? So we're just talking about all of the quarantines that we had. So there were 7 quarantines covering more than 1,200 square miles statewide, 2,500 or more than 2,500 compliance agreements signed and executed. And I looked at the compliance agreements. Basically, if you're a producer, if you're a grower, you're agreeing to, you basically have to report what you have, what you want to ship, and you have to come to some kind of agreement depending on where you are in the quarantine. If you're in the core, it's a lot more stringent. If you're not in the core, it's a little less. But to be able to ship anything, you have to agree with us, like how, you're going to treat it, whether it's going to be a pre-harvest treatment, like a spray with malathion or spinosad, or some kind of post-harvest treatment. Maybe it's, sending fruit to be juiced. And then the conditions surrounding, shipment. If you're going to ship it for post-harvest treatment, you have to safeguard the shipment, obviously, things like that. So it's a lot of work, because that means that somebody or multiple people from the CDFA have to actually, discuss this and have you sign this. And again, we're talking about over 2,500 compliance agreements. So it's a huge amount of work. And then there are grower meetings. So the grower meetings help the growers, provide a way for the growers to get information in person on the quarantine and the implications of the quarantine. And they don't just help the people that are already in the quarantine, but in addition, let's say you're a grower and you're nearby, the quarantine boundary. Well, there's a chance that quarantine is going to expand. If we find more flies, the quarantine can expand. And now all of a sudden you're in the quarantine, and now, you're ready to ship your fruit. And it's like, well, you're kind of out of luck. Well, what happens is you can sign up to start treatment in advance. You don't have to be in the quarantine to start that treatment. And now that kind of gives you a safeguard insurance in a way, because if you suddenly find yourself in the quarantine area, you're already well on your way to completing the number of required treatments. So now, you can ship. So those grower meetings are really important. And we moved, under compliance agreements, we moved 110 million pounds of fruit. That's a lot of fruit, obviously. And you can imagine how the dollar value of that, like, let's say you assume that it's worth, 50 cents a pound, you're talking about $50 million worth of fruit, just as a way to think about that. And then, of course, there's a variety of materials that we do, for outreach. And I don't know if David, if you want to say anything more about that.
Sure, and this was one of the unique cards that we made for the Tau fruit fly. Again, this is one of it was the first Tau fruit fly quarantine in the history of the United States of America, and so we wanted to make sure that we spread the word, especially that pumpkins and squash were host, and this was right around Halloween. So we developed this card to push out and educate residents on how they can help protect their agriculture and natural resources. And just to back up on the grower meetings, there's a ton of regulated entities. So in addition to traditional farmers, a person that grows corn or pumpkins or strawberries, there's also farmers markets are regulated, or nursery stock growers, or your Lowe's and Home Depots of the world, right? And so there's a lot of behind the scenes regulation that happens to make sure that the commercial industry is also compliant and helpful in eradicating the infestations. So we'll go through here some additional outreach up. Oh, so no, not yet. Okay.
So yeah, basically, with Oriental fruit fly, we've been working with the USDA for a while in conducting a molecular analysis on the CO1, the cytochrome oxidase 1 gene. It's a maternally inherited gene, to try to do haplotype analysis and with the hopes of, building up enough information, a library of this information where you could maybe say something about the pathway, the origin of the fly. So, anything like this is really dependent on how much information you have already gathered. It's just like, let's say you have some, group of insects and you've only sequenced one insect and you have a sequence. You're not going to be able to sequence something else and use the sequence data alone to identify that, right? Because you don't have any sampling. You just have one sequence. It's the same here. I mean, what we're able to say is really dependent on how much information we have on these places where the flies are coming from. And we have a lot of information, but it's nowhere near complete. So we're still like in that stage where we're adding information, and I think one of the challenges is just getting samples from these different possible origins. Like I know we've had people on expeditions, going there and collecting information, and more of that stuff would probably help, I think. But anyways, so we do this. We send material to the USDA. They analyze the flies that we find in California, and besides just the number of flies, that we found last year, the huge number of flies that we found in the state, it's also fairly diverse in terms of haplotype diversity. And again, we're talking about just Oriental fruit fly right now. We're not talking about the other species, but yeah, again, in 2023, we found 17 specimens with new haplotypes. So maybe came from, possibly a new pathway or something like that. And just as an example, and I just want to back up and say, typically, when we get the sequence data along with the haplotype name, we'll also say, can Hawaii be ruled out as the origin? The reason for that is we have a lot of information on the haplotype diversity of Oriental fruit fly in Hawaii. So typically, somebody might ask us, hey, do you know where this came from? And our answer is often, either, well, we can rule Hawaii out as the origin. It probably didn't come from Hawaii, or we can't rule it out. It may have come from Hawaii or any of the other numerous places, where Oriental fruit fly is established. So just as an example, in 2022, as an example of the smuggling that we're seeing, especially with e-commerce, there was a find at a market in San Jose with 243 Batroceras specimens. So, and I think that was Oriental fruit fly, and 170 of those had haplotypes that were not previously reported in the state. So yeah, I mean, what does that mean? It could possibly be a new pathway that opened up. I mean, China has the Belt and Road Initiative. I think that's how you say it. And presumably that means that growing areas that maybe were formerly isolated from ports, now are better connected. So you could ship fruit that could be infested from a new area to a port and then have that sent to the United States, for example. So increased transportation, can lead to increased pest risk. Okay, I don't know if you want to add something. We can move on to the next slide.
Yeah, no, nothing to add on this one.
So what are the short-term impacts of finding all of these flies? So when you find a bunch of flies, you have a bunch of projects. This comes at a cost. I mean, we hiring is very difficult. I can say that because I had conversations with people that are trying to do it. It's very difficult in California, especially with the cost of living. We don't really have a competitive, we can't pay a competitive salary. I think even in comparison to things like fast food, probably especially now. So in terms of flexibility, it's a challenge, to adapt to a sudden increase in projects like we had last year. So, and also the people that are working on these projects, now they're in the field for longer hours. They have, very difficult goals, they have to service a lot of traps. They have to talk to a lot of people, many of whom may not be happy about being involved in these projects. So, that could lead to burnout. You have a job like that where you have to interact with angry, residents who don't want you in their yard. And it's like every day you have to feel like the bad guy. And, so it has an impact on staff. And last year, what we had to do was we had assistance from the USDA and other groups just to help us get all of these regulatory treatment activities done. Removing all the fruit is a good example. We couldn't have done that in a reasonable time frame just with our own people. And of course, as I mentioned before, we need to respond to these infestations in a timely fashion, because if we don't maintain a free from status, now the USDA, in order to protect the United States, they have the authority to quarantine the entire state of California. Okay, so I mean, there's plenty of other pests where there's examples of where entire U.S. states are quarantined, whether from California or by the USDA. So we don't want that. We don't want our trade to be impacted. Somebody in another country could say, well, we liked California produce, but now they have this fruit fly, and even though they're in a quarantine and they have to do treatments, it's a little more risky. So maybe that tips the balance to shifting to another producer, right? They want to get source their produce from another country or another state. Okay, next slide. So again, the USDA could enact statewide quarantines. And if you're in a quarantine, that means that you're having to conduct treatments. There's all kinds of things that you have to now do to ship the produce, if indeed you can ship it at all, right? So if there's no treatment available, you may not be able to ship produce, and especially for smaller specialty things, it's possible that there may not be an acceptable, treatment for that product. So what that means is that the cost of the produce will go up. That cost is going to be passed on to the consumer. You could have loss of domestic and international markets, and there will be a cascade of impacts on people and industries that are dependent on agriculture. So farm workers, processors, ports, transportation, things like that will all be impacted. And of course, if you have impacts to production, it's not like, people, these aren't government-run commune farms. I mean, they're businesses. And if you say, we can't do business growing this fruit in California, you shut down. Somebody, who goes to a supermarket, the supermarket may source that fruit from another place like Florida, but that cost may go up. And especially, if you're a low income person, that may make the difference between being able to afford fruits and vegetables or not. And of course, if you grow the stuff in your backyard, like, that's a very important thing. And like in LA, for example, you're growing fruit in your backyard. now maybe you can't afford to treat it, so now you're losing your fruit to that. So your diet could be heavily impacted by fruit fly infestation. And of course, there's potential for environmental impacts as well. This is not, I don't think this is nearly as well studied, which is kind of common, with some pests, like wood borers, it's a lot easier to find, a lot of solid data and being able to quantify these impacts. Fruit flies, there probably would be impacts. It's hard to say exactly what they would be. I mean, certainly increased use of pesticides to control the fruit flies, that would be a major one, I think. And that would also impact human health as well.
Indeed. We've been talking a lot about the commercial agriculture here, but it's also people's backyard gardens and California's natural resources and unique biodiversity that's impacted by invasive species, including fruit flies, since that's part of our mission is to protect California as a whole, the agriculture, natural resources, and unique biodiversity here in California. Oops. And so talk a little bit about some of our outreach efforts here as well. CDFA really stepped up with these new fruit fly infestations from 2023 and going into this year. And so we created a new fruit fly landing page on our website. So if you go to cdfa.ca.gov, you'll see the invasive fruit fly information front and center so that folks can easily access that. We also developed a number of different innovative or creative outreach ideas, including wrapping some trucks, which I'll show you here in a moment, some yard signs, freestanding billboards, as well as traditional billboards. You can see here in the corner, this is actually, and I actually have one right here in my office. This is a yard sign for folks' residential areas. So first and foremost, we're trying to raise awareness of the quarantine, right? To make sure that people are aware of the quarantine. And then we ask them to take specific actions as well. We also hold public and grower meetings, as Kyle alluded to earlier. We produce a number of paper and digital materials that we'll show you as well, especially when our trappers are going door to door. There's a lot of handout material that we hand to residents so that they can easily access the information. And then we also utilize traditional and social media. I'll show you some examples of that here. Here's the cool kind of racing stripe, what I call the don't pack a pest messaging. So we're trying to, first and foremost, put the fires out, right? Eradicate the fruit flies that we have here and then stop the infestations from happening in the future. And as Kyle alluded to, there's a number of pathways, including human beings, personally bringing things on their person when they travel or mailing packages. And we hope it's not malicious, but folks think that, bringing that apple back from that one location isn't a problem. They get it home, take a bite, see a maggot inside, throw it out, then it's millions of dollars in our tax dollars that we have to utilize, as well as spraying materials, right? And so that's what we're trying to avoid. So you can see here, when you travel, declare agriculture items, don't pack a pest, help us protect our food and natural resources. So trying to make that connection with folks of, yes, that one apple or that one piece of fruit could have significant impacts to California. And I should point out, it's not just fruits and vegetables, it's also meat products and other conveyances that could harbor invasive species. Additionally, we did some traditional billboards along the freeways in the Riverside San Bernardino area. You can see here, you've entered an invasive species fruit fly quarantine area. And again, we're urging folks trying to raise awareness first and foremost. And then the messaging here is help us eliminate this by not moving your fruits and vegetables off your properties. So you're not artificially moving the pest around. And it can't really see here, but it's USDA, CDFA, and then we partner with the county of San Bernardino. This side was in San Bernardino, and then in this case, the city of Riverside, Redlands. And then you can see here in this other billboard, this actually we constructed it. And so working with the city of Redlands as a number of cities, not that many, but a number of cities have their actual remnant groves, right? Historical groves that the city actually owns. And so this was the city of Redlands property, and working with the city of Redlands and the county, they were more than willing to put these signs up. So we paid for the materials and had them installed, but this is a sign that we created, and kind of created our own billboard within the quarantine area, again, raising awareness of the quarantine and then steps that residents can take. And then we're always trying to tie it to the don't pack a pest messaging. So again, trying to put the fire out, but then also kind of with one eye looking to the future to stop these infestations from the future. So reactively and then proactively trying to work on some of these issues. And so these are some of the additional signage, billboards that we created, alert, again, raising awareness that the fruit fly quarantine zone and don't move your homegrown produce. We also created some radio ads that blanketed the San Bernardino Riverside County areas, the infestation areas, targeting multiple languages. And so we're going to show you here, these are 30-second ads, but you can kind of get a flavor here. I'll show you a 30-second English and a 30-second Spanish ad.
Riverside and San Bernardino County residents, we need your help. An invasive pest called the Oriental fruit fly has been found in your area and can infest over 300 types of fruits and vegetables, ultimately making the produce inedible. Residents can help eliminate Oriental fruit fly populations by not moving homegrown produce from the property where it's grown, cooperating with agricultural officials, and inspecting and reporting signs of the fly or maggots. Learn more at cafruitfly.com.
And then here's the Spanish version.
Residentes de los condados de Riverside y San Bernardino, necesitamos su ayuda. Encontraron en su zona una plaga invasora llamada mosca oriental de la fruta que puede infestar más de 300 tipos de frutas y verduras, dejándolas incomibles. Los residentes pueden ayudar a eliminar las poblaciones de la mosca oriental de la fruta al no transportar los productos agrícolas caseros de la propiedad en donde crecen, al cooperar con los funcionarios agrícolas y al inspeccionar y reportar los indicios de la mosca o de sus gusanos. Para más información visiten cafruitfly.com.
So those are some of the
Riverside
radio.
and San Bernardino County residents, we need your help.
We also did some banner ads, right? So this is the Orange County Register, and you can see here on the top of the banner, don't move your homegrown produce, and then on the side, a CDFA ad. There's actually 3 different ads here, and then you can see clicking through the ads up in the right-hand corner. And again, here on the last digital ad, we had the don't move homegrown produce, and then you can see the banner ad on the bottom. And then of course, you can see the translation into Spanish as well, to make sure that we're reaching as many diverse communities as possible with the messaging. So there's a number of partners that are involved in these eradication projects. The CISAW, the California Association of California Ag Commissioners and Sealers Association. Of course, USDA is a huge partner in this, and the California Conservation Corps was instrumental in helping us remove those fruit from the trees in the San Bernardino Riverside area, because it takes a lot of hands, as well as the Cooperative Agriculture Support Services Authority, and then Kyle alluded to professional pickers as well. So, but within CDFA, we also pretty much we have 4 branches within plant division. We're all activated, and then Secretary Ross and others within CDFA helped us to deploy additional divisions to help us staff up, because again, these are emergency projects, and we don't know when they're going to hit. So it's always a difficult conundrum of trying to come up with the personnel, and Kyle alluded to the state rates of pay are sometimes lower than the commercial industry. So we have a lot of competition. And I mentioned the ag commissioners do additional trapping. They're invaluable on the outreach side of the equation, because they're able to really help us tailor the messaging and understand the community. And they also work on regulatory activities. USDA deployed trappers from across the United States of America. Over 400 different USDA employees traveled to the San Bernardino Riverside area to help with the project. They also sent regulatory specialists, and then created an incident management team deployed to the Redlands Oriental Fruit Fly project. I mentioned the California Conservation Corps, and then the services there as well. Kyle, you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, so what are we planning to do in the future? We're continuing to analyze, obviously, the molecular analysis of Oriental fruit fly. That continues. We're also assessing the efficacy of the detection and eradication techniques that we're using. There's research underway to look at alternative methods of eradication. So one example would be using those traps as a male attractant technique for Q lure responding flies. You know, that's immensely, it's much more labor intensive than just going around in a truck and squirting, you know, the splats on the trees and things like that for the methyl eugenol attracted flies like we do with Oriental fruit fly. So we're looking at the potential, you know, we might be able to use another product to do the same thing for Q lure responding flies. We don't have to go around and set up a trap, you know, and then service that trap. That's a lot of work.
First off, thank you, Kyle and David. It's a great presentation. And for those of you who have questions and haven't put them in the Q&A yet, you're welcome to do so. So we'll start off here with the first question. How does one become part of the detection network?
So, so two parts, you know, the answer for that. So in order for us to take action on a fruit fly find, in order for it to count to trigger, you know, any kind of response like delimitation, eradication, it has to be what we refer to as an official sample. And that means that it has to be collected, you know, personally by an employee of a regulatory agency. So it's got to be the county, the state, the feds. We can't take a sample from a resident or someone else who's not in a regulatory agency and then trigger, you know, a quarantine. I mean, that there's reasons for that. Obviously, it, you know, can slow things down, but that's how we do things. If you find something that you think might be, you know, a new pest, a pest of concern, you can contact us directly with a pest hotline, send an image. You can also send contact the county ag commissioner and have them collect the sample. And it still won't be official, but we will get the sample in our lab, and then we'll have to go and get an official sample. But that can be great help. I mean, we're really learning about the importance of citizen science now, and we're trying to access and use that information whenever we can. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, and we ask, you know, everyone to be diligent. If you do find something, you can submit it. And as Kyle said, it might not be an official sample, but we can always follow up with an official sample as well. So you are hereby deputized to go forth and do good deeds and help protect our agriculture and natural resources here in California.
Thanks. The next question has to do with introductions of pests. Why does CDFA not have a list of prohibited fruits or those that are known to have been intentionally introduced with and along with native invasive pests? The 2020 graphic list of restricted produce contains very little that may be of interest to the diverse populations of the state.
David, do you have an answer to that? Because I don't right now.
Yeah, so you know, typically you know, there are some prohibited fruits and vegetables that USDA has. For example, long sot, I believe aren't available under any means into the United States of America. But as far as, you know, having a prohibition list, I mean, because invasive species can travel. We're talking about fruit flies today, right? But it could also be a disease, and so you know, very difficult to see. So the pathways are immense, and so for us to try.
Are we working with e-commerce sites? I mean, that might be something worth bringing up, because otherwise, I mean, obviously there's regulations on what you can bring into the country, and that's a USDA issue, by the way. That's not California. I mean, that they're the gatekeepers, and so when you show up at the airport, you probably see a sign. You know, I think I remember seeing that. You know, you have to declare any fruits and vegetables, right? But in terms of the e-commerce, that's kind of a big threat. And are we linking up with them at all?
Yes, for example, Amazon, we've been successful. You may recall a moss ball issue that happened a couple of years ago, where some zebra quagga mussels. So working with our other partners in Fish and Wildlife and others, we were able to stop that pathway. So there is opportunities there, but because of more trade and travel and the ability to, ask, go on your computer and something arrives at your door an hour later, right? I mean, that's the problem.
Yep.
But also parcels as well. So folks sending parcels from infested places of the world containing invasive species are also problematic. So,
And it's sort of a kind of outreach, I guess. I mean, there was a recent case, and I think there's going to be some significant penalties for one of the fruit smuggling groups in the Bay Area. So, I mean, that's, hopefully word of mouth happens, resulting from that, and people understand, because in that case, it was pretty brazen. And it was either, I don't think it was simply a lack of knowledge. I think it was a, lack of confidence in the ability of the state and other groups to actually do anything about it. So obviously, they can if they care enough about it. So I'll just add that as well.
yeah, and Kyle's alluding to a case in San Jose where the district attorney brought charges against some individuals smuggling fruit in. Again, this is the hopefully the outlier, right? And the majority of the cases aren't malicious, that people accidentally bring fruits and vegetables back with them. But yeah, so those are all pathways that we're concerned with. But trying to create a list would be very difficult, and so for all the reasons enumerated, that's why we don't have it.
This is another one of those areas where we have multi-agencies working together very closely. The other one that I would point out here is the local agricultural commissioners' offices that in many cases have the detection dogs that they go into those facilities and they can detect for fruits, meats, other things that are not supposed to be in those packages, and do a great job of helping to stop that type of thing from coming in.
Yeah,
I do see that we're coming up on the hour. David and Kyle, are you able to stay longer to answer more questions?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So we appreciate everybody that has joined us today. We're going to say this is the end of the official part of this call, but please stay on. We've got both speakers have agreed to stay on and answer more questions. When you do decide to leave, please do click on that link that's in the chat and take that final survey to let us know about your experience here.
And yeah, well, Randall alluded to the dog teams as well. I mean, we could do a whole separate presentation on dog teams. There's CDFA and county dog teams, as well as the USDA dog teams, which we'd be happy to talk about. But again, we're just trying to focus on the fruit fly issues at the moment. So go ahead, Julie, if you want to read the next question. Please.
Thanks. So we got a comment in the chat, which is kind of an adjunct to the last question and your answers. That this is the poster says that they recently received a package and it had moth eggs on the packaging and a dead moth inside, and this person knew to take it to their local county ag commissioner.
Perfect.
So yeah, great citizen action there. Thank you.
That's exactly the action that we'd asked for, because the counties work in cooperation with us very closely, and that's always a good point of contact. Or your UC Master Gardeners are also another great resource as well, right? That can help identify stuff. So,
right, which is a segue to our next question from a Master Gardener. This individual is going to request a yard sign from CDFA, but would like to know if there's a possible resource in Los Angeles County to go direct to get them.
we partner with Los Angeles County, and I know Rachel Burnap is on as well, as a stellar cooperator out there in Los Angeles County. I don't think they have any yard signs out there, but we can get them the yard signs, and I think it was by Saturday you needed them. So if possible, Julie, if you could send them my email and we can coordinate, I can try to get them some signs, or at least logistically try to get them a few.
Okay, I'm going to connect two Daves together. Dave, their requester's name is David too. Dave Yamaoka, I'll get in touch, or I'll share the contact. All right. Are there any measures taken within trapping quarantine zones to avoid accidental trapping and eradication of California endemic fly species?
Yeah, so good question. So, I think most people would agree that, passive trapping or passive collection, I'm sorry, is a different thing from where you have an attractant and you have a trap, that then kills the insect. I mean, there's at least a potential for impacting something when you're talking about using an attractant. You don't really have control over how many things come into the trap. This is something, so trapping by the CDFA, as far as I'm aware, is actually exempt from a lot of environmental requirements because it's considered data collection. That's how it was explained to me. And in the past, generally there have been very limited or isolated requests for information, like with honeybees. There may be some other like specific species of concern. There may be, we do technical consultation with Fish and Wildlife, for example, and they may ask about, like a particular endangered insect, that might be in the area. But in terms of general impacts on just a whole group of, native to Tephridids, I'm not aware. There may have been some kind of analysis done for that, but if so, I'm not aware of it. And presumably the potential would depend on the type of attractant used. So if you're talking about a methyl eugenol trap, if those species aren't attracted to methyl eugenol, there's probably, negligible impacts. If something was attracted to it, that might be a different story, but I don't have that information off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Well, I could also add that these are localized opportunities that we work on. And so if they're endemic to California, they'd be spread out throughout California and then would come back into the area that we were dealing with potentially. So, our goal is always just to target the invasive species though. And so next question, please.
Question from San Diego County and with regard to any quarantines there.
No, there's no active fruit fly quarantines in San Diego County right now.
Yeah, I believe there's another type of quarantine, but not fruit flies, right?
Yeah, not fruit flies. There's quarantine for HLB, right? Wong being disease. Yeah.
Okay. A question from somebody who has been under Oriental fruit fly quarantine twice and notices that there's not a lot of multilingual outreach where they live and want to know about, I know you touched upon this a little bit in your presentation, but just wants, and there are a lot of laborers who don't speak English in the area that don't understand or really need to be better informed and just wants your feedback about your strategies using multilingual outreach.
So yes, when we do have an invasive species, it's sometimes, first in the nation. And so we're just scrambling, right? Just try to develop any outreach materials that we can, because we can't be ready for anything in the, everything in the world, right? And so we do try to do our best to get messaging out there in language and try to work with the ag commissioners to identify different ethnic communities that we need to target as well. And then I would add that on our longer term programs, like our Don't Pack a Pest signage at international ports of entry, where we partner with USDA and Customs and Border Protection and county partners, we do have signs there in multiple languages, including Vietnamese and Chinese are pretty standard languages for us, as well as Spanish. So, we've also, again, there's an Oriental fruit fly project in Sacramento County where we had a Hmong population. So we, developed outreach in Hmong and a number of different things, doing some videos with Hmong community and signage and handouts as well. So can we do a better job? Yes, of course, and we always strive to do that, and we look for improvement opportunities. But trying to hit the ground running and doing the best we can. But yes, there's always opportunities to do better.
The county is always a big help. I mean, we always work closely with the county, and they do they're really the boots on the ground for a lot of this stuff. So we rely on them, you know, to kind of inform us about any local issues and things like that. So
And yeah, I'll also add that we do outreach to elected officials as well and ask those same questions. What communities are you know, within the boundaries of these quarantines that we should be reaching out to? Please tell us opportunities, you know, those type of things, you know, for example, Chinese New Year, we did do outreach specifically to the Chinese community of urging folks not to move fruits and vegetables out of quarantine areas. So we try to do the best we can, but yes, you know, California is a huge place, and trying to get our messaging out is very costly, and we try to do the best we can with the resources that we have, but we can do better.
Next question is about a citizen cooperation with detection efforts. And this person wants to know if they can or should share samples from home gardens, especially when their property is tangent to commercial growers.
Yeah, you can always send a photograph or multiple photographs to the pest hotline, and those all get sent to me. You know, I filter them and decide, you know, something should be followed up on or not, and how to do that. So you can always send images to pest hotline, preferably, you know, try to make it as clear as possible, as close up. We get a lot of really blurry images. I don't think anybody asking that question is going to be someone I have to worry about with that, but just to try to keep it as clear as possible, maybe against a white background, white sheet of paper. Also, you can submit samples to the county ag commissioner, as we said, you know, before. And yeah, like just as an example, if you send a photograph of a male Mediterranean fruit fly, and you're in the Bay Area, you're in the LA basin, that's actually a case where I'll probably just say, you know, it's probably a sterile male because we release millions of those. So we're not going to go following up on every single one of those. We have a lot of traps out there. So it kind of depends on what it is, what we think it might be based on the available information. But yeah, of course, I mean, you know, just send something in, photograph or the sample to the county.
Yeah, we count on citizen scientists to be vigilant and helping look in their backyards and their front yards and their local community gardens to see if they find any invasive species and report those as quickly as possible, right? That's the whole goal, is early detection and rapid response. So again, you know, we'd love to work with you all and deputize you all and help us get more eyes out there.
You know, we try to scan iNaturalists, for example, you know, every so often, and there's people at the lab who do that too for their own groups. But yeah, I mean, if you think that something is important, I would say, you know, bypass that and try to get it to the county or to our attention, you know, immediately.
Quick comment in the chat. Somebody was wondering if the presenters could aim the videos more so they could see lips as well, so they can lip read. And just a quick comment to all the participants, closed captioning is enabled. So that's also an option. But yes, thank you, David and Kyle.
Yeah, I think mine's more of a lighting issue, but yes, yeah. Maybe kind of a cave. Yeah, next question, Julie. Sorry for going over time as well. We'll try to wrap this up.
It's good. It's robust and it's important. And we're really grateful that you all can stay with us to answer questions. So thank you. What have you any projections for pest pressures for the rest of the year?
We don't have a magic ball, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have any reason to think that it'll be different from last year. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that, you know, behavior changed after the pandemic. I mean, if that's the case, you know, I don't know if that's going to continue. And I mean, I think growing population, the fruit flies are getting in, you know, we think because of people, right? They're bringing in stuff. And if you have more people, then the risk is higher, you know, all else being equal. So I don't know if California's population is increasing. It may actually be decreasing, but you know, again, like more internet markets, you know, of various fruits. If those things are expanding, then I would think that the risk is probably going to increase. It may actually get worse. So, but yeah, as David said, it's just impossible to say. I mean, yeah, it's really hard to say.
We just hope, you know, efforts like this will help more eyes out there and again, early detection, rapid response, or just keep it out in the first place, right? Everyone agrees on exclusion activities. And so, you know, that's the best path forward. Next question, please.
The guava fly was mentioned at the beginning of your talk, and can you recommend resources about this and with regard to the frequency and location of guava flies?
That's not something that we find frequently, and I really can't recall off the top of my head, you know, where we last found that. I just know that it's not one of the flies that we get. It's not like Oriental fruit fly, Mexican fruit fly, Mediterranean fruit fly. It's not something that we find a lot. I think it's primarily in the LA area. And I don't know what they mean by resources. I mean, there's identification stuff online. You could find photographs of the of what the adult flies look like. The immature fruit flies, they're just maggots. There's ways that you could use, there's microscopic characters you could use to distinguish tephridids, the family Tephrididae, from other things like Drosophilids. And if you find a tephridid in a fruit like a guava, that's kind of a big deal. You know, we'd like to know about that because it probably is one of these bad, you know, invasive fruit flies.
So the question was with regard to a specific geographic area. Are there any maps that are accessible, even though this person didn't request?
So we don't have a current guava fruit fly infestation, and so all of California is susceptible potentially to these fruit flies, right? I mean, unless you're in the high Sierras or the desert, you know, it could be, you know, microclimates within California, right? So we don't. Go ahead.
And you could find, you know, information online where it occurs now, you know, elsewhere in the world. I mean, if that's what, you know, that information is readily available. You could go to the CABI website, CABI, you know, look up guava fruit fly, make sure that the species is the same, you know, because some of these common names are not really good, you know, with insects. Sometimes things can be, two different species can fall under the same common name. So just make sure that the species is correct. And I actually can't recall, what the species of that is. I think it's Spectrosera, but I don't know which one. But there is information available online. And in terms of where we think it might be, you know, if it gets into California, I really don't know. I mean, I would say LA area would be high risk because that's where people are and they're bringing stuff in. Where it might do well in California, you'd have to do like a model. You'd have to model the current distribution, and that would be outside of California again, because we don't have any established populations. But, you know, you'd have to look at the climate of where it occurs now, and then kind of look at California and then say, okay, what are the areas that would most likely host a population if it got here?
Okay. Next questioner lives in a quarantine area and has been very vocal about helping educate the public, neighbors, friends, family, and would like some help with strategy from you all regarding how to impress the importance of not moving fruit off of one's own property.
You know, again, going back to the, you know, that one piece of fruit, it's not going to cause a problem, right? You know, at least that's the mentality of some individuals. And so, yes, that one piece of fruit can have an impact. And so we do want to educate folks about not bringing fruits and vegetables back with them. And the national strategic resource that California is, if these fruit flies get established, you know, it's not a pretty picture for the United States of America, right? And so we want to make sure that we keep these out. And so just, you know, I think allowing opportunity to educate them about what's at stake, not only our commercial agriculture, you know, we all eat 3 times a day, but people's backyard fruits and vegetables, right? And so that's really where, you know, I think we hope it doesn't get to that issue, but you know, if a fruit fly was established, that's where I think you'd see a dramatic, you know, increase of damage, because commercial growers can potentially deal with some invasive species by different tools in their toolbox, but residents, you know, it's going to be a different story, right? So.
Why was olive fruit fly not brought up in today's discussion?
Olive fruit fly is established in California. I can't recall if it's B or C rated, but it's present. It's already here. You know, we don't. So what we do is we're not going around trying to manage well-established pests. There's a lot of pests in California at the point where you can no longer eradicate it. You don't spend millions of dollars and and all these limited resources, which are actually very limited. People may think that, you know, the state of California, you know, has tons of money and we must be able to do everything. You know, we really can't. We have to cherry pick what we decide to work on. And you know, I don't have a good background on the history of that pest, you know, when it got here, but obviously at some point it was decided that that eradication is no longer feasible, right? So it's here and people are going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And I presume that they have figured out, at least the growers probably have tools, you know, to manage it. But yeah, that's all I can really say on that now.
Well, and that's kind of the worst case scenario, right? That fruit fly got in here and then was so widespread that we weren't able to eradicate it. And so that's what we're trying to avoid on these others. Luckily, the olive fruit fly is very targeted to olives, but unfortunately, it's kind of killed our fresh olive market here in California. Right now, it's all olive oil. So that was one of the consequences, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid with these other fruit flies. Folks think, oh, just let the Oriental fruit fly get established. I mean, the impacts would be so much significantly higher because of the host range of the other fruit.
Also think about the difference in regulatory impacts. So olive fruit flies, these are olives. What do you produce? You know, I think it's mainly olive oil and olives in brine in a can, right? So there's obviously no, I think crushing in an olive press or canning in brine are probably approved methods for, you know, moving infested olives off of a property in a quarantine, right? So that's going to be different. You know, you're not going to care. Someone in Italy isn't going to care about getting a can of olives from a place that has olive fruit fly. We have citrus that is infested with Oriental fruit fly. Well, that's a huge deal because any kind of a treatment could even impact the quality of the fruit. So it's like a balance. You know, you have to figure out what you can do, you know, to treat that fruit to allow it to be moved, minimize the risk, and that treatment's got to be acceptable to the trading partners. So it's also a different. There's a different, it may not have been the real intent of the question, but there is also some regulatory, you know, trade impacts I think are different from that species compared to the others.
And we've also worked with the olive oil or the olive industry here in California and are developing some biocontrol efforts. And thanks to Dr. Lara for the shout out here at CDFA. And so but that's not an eradication tool, right? It's a control measure. And so, but it is to provide some relief to growers and farmers. But again, it's an endemic here to California. Unfortunately, now it's established. And so to try to put that genie back in the bottle is nearly impossible. And so it's that's, again, the whole reason why we go so hard off of these other fruit flies to eradicate them, because of the threshold of commodities impacted are exponentially larger, right? And so that's, you know, one of the reasons. But it's unfortunate, and you know, we all love olives, and I know UC's got a great program as well, working on olives, as USDA as well. So, you know, a lot of partners are working on that, but that's exactly why we try to eradicate these fruit flies. Next question, please.
And I'll just add, Dr. Lara would like from CDFA would like to add that CDFA does have a biocontrol project for fruit fly in partnership with University of California and USDA. And
I mentioned that already. Yeah, that was what I was mentioning.
Okay, he asked to share the link. Would you like me to post that, David?
Yeah, please. That'd be great.
Okay. Next question. Somebody inquires about the availability of a comparative slide with images of the various fruit flies. If that's available, they can find that anywhere.
They're all dinky. So we actually have them. I have a display of them, and you know, they're all pretty small. But Kyle, a more scientific response.
There's got to be something out there. I don't know how to get this back, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that there has to be something. Like, it wouldn't make sense to not have something like that. So maybe there's a way to get, there's a way to post it later, send it to someone.
Is there a size range, or are they all pretty much the same
Yeah,
size?
I can show you this. Go ahead, Kyle.
I think they're typically, you know, like anywhere from 5 millimeters to 10 millimeters in length. Again, the larvae are going to look pretty much the same. They'll have a, you know, the spiracles on the back end of the larva. You know, you'll have characters where you can distinguish the family Tephrididae from others, but the The adults are pretty distinct and they have patterns on the wings often and different colors.
These are
Yeah.
how small they are. See, these are like the Mediterranean, Oriental, Mexican, and the melon fruit fly. So you can see, I don't know how well you can see them, but they're all, in my non-scientific eye, they're similar size. But obviously these Mediterranean fruit flies look a little bit smaller, but very dinky compared to the rest. And I think they're smaller than house flies as well, as another kind of point.
Yeah, there's a few that are larger. Like I think tow fly is fairly large, but yeah, the rest are pretty small. But yeah, we can find something, there's a way to get that information back to.
100%. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we can add that, and thank you for the suggestions. Next question.
So I guess, do they need to provide an email or something that?
If they can, but you're not sure of the resource, right?
We
No,
can find
off
it.
the
We just
top.
don't have it at our fingertips.
All right, please post your email, the questioner, please post your email in the chat and we'll pass that on to Kyle and David. So, and then there's somebody that wants to know where they can access outreach materials to help with your efforts.
Sure, yeah, go to our website, cdfa.ca.gov is one opportunity, or you can always reach out to myself, and I'm happy to put my email address in there, david.pagos@cdfa.ca.gov, and we can coordinate and send out, disseminate information. And we do partner with a number of master gardeners and others as well of pushing out information. So yes, that'd be a great opportunity. The Don't Pack a Pest also is a website that's available for folks, and we have our Firewood burner. Don't move. It's firewood.ca.gov. But we're starting to populate that with more outreach materials as well.
And do you have templates for social media posts? I think this individual was wondering about that, how they could leverage your things on their own.
Sure. Yes. Again, yes, we do. And I'd love to follow up with you and have an opportunity to help amplify the messaging, because it's all the messenger, right? And so we would love to have, that's why we work with the counties and the cities to push out information to residents, because it's coming from different, recognizable and official sources of information, right?
Hey. Thanks. What does a backyard grower do if they have concerns about possible pest?
It's the same advice, so they could. Did I cut you off?
No, go. Thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, so they can either send a photograph to the pest hotline or contact the county ag commissioner. It all depends on an identification. So without knowing what it is, a lot of times damage, we get pictures of damage and we can't do anything with it. We can't tell them anything because it could have been caused by anything. It's rare that you'll have symptoms that are really clear and that are photographed and captured well enough to diagnose even tentatively, a disease or a pest. But if you can actually get an insect that you think is causing damage, submit a sample to the county or take some photographs, send it to us via the pest hotline. That's really, and because, if you contact somebody who's not familiar with, master gardeners are also pretty good. But yeah, that's what I would say for that.
Yeah, and before taking it to your county ag commissioner's office, if you do get a specimen, we urge you to put it in a Ziploc bag and put it in your freezer so that you can eliminate, kill it before transporting it. If it is in fact an invasive species, you don't want it to fly away. But as Kyle alluded to earlier, we have our Don't Pack a Pest, our Report a Pest app, as well as our 800 number that folks can, but it's all, all these projects start on a positive identification, right? And that's why our laboratory is so important, because we don't speculate. We are, driven by science. So we have to know exactly what the culprit is. And then that leads to the reaction, right, of understanding. So that's always the first step. And that's why we have this official sample that has to be submitted through official means, so that we can have an official sample, which that actually triggers the program. So yes, we would love your help and guidance. The more eyes out there, the better.
Hey, question about outreach to shippers and public transportation hubs.
So this is to
It-
display proactive messaging. Yes, so we do have messaging in our international ports of entry, where we do work with Customs and Border Protection. However, it's always a numbers game, right? You have around 30,000 folks coming through LAX in any one day, and so the numbers are massive, right? I mean, it's the San Ysidro land border crossing is the busiest border crossing in the world, right? And so I mean, these are huge amounts of people coming through and transporting things, right? And so those are always an issue, but we do try to proactively work with entities to push out information. I think there's like United States Postal Service is, we partner with them on our dog teams, but like USP, for example, like FedEx, for example, we do have dog teams that are running in those facilities as well, and so we do try to detect unmarked parcels before they can be released into California. But
or mismarked, mismanifested.
yes, right, Missy. And so, can we do more? Of course, this is another one of those proactive situations, but with the state's dire financial situation right now, it's like, we're just cobbling things together the best we can to try to get messaging out. But yes, there's obviously more that we could do, and that's why opportunities like this are so important to help you all that are participating can help us amplify this messaging. And again, we're just hyper focused on fruit flies right at the moment, but we deal with so many different invasive species throughout California that
We're actually lucky. We're lucky with fruit flies because there's a vast amount of experience, with detection and eradication. There's so much data available, and we have so much experience with it, unfortunately, but it works out also because we know what seems to work. And then if you look at, I mean, there's a vast universe of pests out there. There's probably upwards of 2 million described species of insects. And that's why, like sometimes we get these permit reviews and somebody wants to bring in a bunch of butterflies, and it takes me a day to go through that list, for one permit. It's because you can't know this stuff off the top of your head. I mean, there's no way, So I mean, there's so many things out there that are potential threats, as many pests as we have, there's still plenty that we don't have yet. And it's really hard to know, to try to predict what might come in. And then, again, no traps, available for most of those things. That's another reason why we depend on people in the field, whether it's the county or a grower, or just somebody who sees something in their backyard.
Yeah, and California is that unique Mediterranean climate, just like you and I and all of us love living here, right? We don't have hard freezes, and it's kind of beautiful all year around, right? And that's an ideal situation. If you're one of these bad actor bugs coming in, you look around, you're in heaven, right? You made it to California, and so you're just going to take off and proliferate, and so that's the I guess the both of the bane and the draw of California, how beautiful it is. But again, pretty much not every bug, but a number of a vast majority of the insect world could probably get established in California, or some of the ecosystems that we have here are microclimates. So yes, can we do more on the outreach? Yes, and we need to, and we're focused on that. Just trying to get the resources together, and to accomplish that is always difficult.
And a question about producers, growers that are located near a quarantine boundary. Is there any cost to them? And I'm not exactly.
Yeah, he's go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that if you want to be proactive and protect yourself against the possibility of being swallowed up within a quarantine that could expand, really at any time, there would be a cost for that treatment. If there's a treatment available, start with that. And then if there is, I'm not aware of any government entity, providing relief for that. So I think that would be at your cost as a grower. In terms of regulatory impacts, if you're not in the quarantine, if you're trying to ship your product through the quarantine, there may very well be impacts to that, but I'm not aware of any others.
Yeah, so growers in our state are unfortunately impacted significantly by these quarantines, and so we always feel for the growers, right? And very unfortunate.
Okay, the next question is also from a grower from San Bernardino County who has citrus, subtropical fruit crops, and has some fruit flies occasionally, but lots of other pests and spots. They want to know where they can go for assistance with their pests and in San Bernardino County, right?
So if they mean fruit fly, I'm hoping that they mean like Drosophilids, right? So sometimes we call those pomace flies or vinegar flies to distinguish them from the tephritid fruit flies. So I'm hoping that's what they mean. And in that case, we have a lot of those in California. There's no kind of, eradication program or plan for those. In fact, the entire genus Drosophila is not regulated by the state of California. So, but in terms of management and identification, the management, I think you'd have to talk with, UCIPM or cooperative extension people for advice. UCIPM has a bunch of pages online where you can look up different crops, and if you know what pests you have, you can see what recommendations they have, and they include, conventional as well as organic approaches in many cases. And then for an identification, you can always contact the county, submit a sample to them, and I think you maybe charge something for an identification, but hopefully it's not a lot, and you could get an ID. Also, you could send photographs to us again, and if it turns out to actually be a tephritid fruit fly, that'll be good that you tell us. So, so thanks.
Hey,
Yeah, and the county ag commissioners don't charge for identification, so you can always go to your ag commissioner's office, or if you're near Sacramento, Meadowview, you can always take it to our lab as well.
hey. Two more questions. How long does effectiveness of the black spots on the light pole last?
So they're talking about the slat. Those max slats are composed of the waxy matrix, which I think is the vast majority of the material. Then there's a insecticide, which is spinosad. That's an organic insecticide. And then there's an attractant, which in the current, eradication programs, we're only doing methyl eugenol. And the actual material, which, is as far as I know, fairly inert, that I think can remain for a while, on poles and trees. But the insecticide and I suspect the insecticide breaks down fairly quickly, probably in a number of weeks. And it's probably the same thing for the methyl eugenol.
Yes, it's the UV light will break it down as well as the weather, and then the local insects will also feed on it also. So a number of those will diminish the poles, and it will be ultimately it's a biological material, right? So it will decompose.
Yeah, it breaks down, and it's also volatile, so it'll, that's why we have to keep applying it. Otherwise we could just do it once.
And final question, are black fig fly numbers pressures at all close to quarantine declaration?
Well, so black fig fly, I'm pretty sure that we trying to recall this. There's too many things, remember, but I mean, black fig fly is established in California. Speaking on my, personally, I don't think there's any plan at all to eradicate it. It's unfortunately here. We're supporting research on detection and control methods that would work well in California. That work is being done by University of California. Black fig fly is currently in Southern California as well as the Bay Area, Alameda County at least. It is not yet known to be in the major fig producing counties, like in the Central Valley. It's not known to be there yet. But unfortunately, it probably will make its way there eventually. So yeah, now we're really focusing on supporting the research for detection and control and preparing for its arrival in those areas. The thing with black fig fly is that they feed on only one plant, only on Ficus carica, domesticated fig. But the thing is that it's grown everywhere. It's naturalized, on the sides of highways and in ravines in Southern California. So, once we determined that it was in, multiple places, especially in an urban area, it was not an ideal target for eradication. You compare it to something like European grape, and that's even though that's also something that feeds on one host plant, it's in agricultural areas. You can kind of quarantine those off. We had multiple tools to use, like pheromones and things like that. It was a different situation. Black fig fly, if we had found it in one spot, we might have had a chance, I think, but yeah.
And I think to answer a specific question, will it, if there's a number of black fig flies, will it trigger a quarantine? The answer is no, because to Kyle's point that it's endemic here, it's established here in California, unfortunately. So those there won't be any black fig fly quarantines, but as Kyle alluded to, there's a number of tools that we're trying to provide growers.
Even a berated insect is still subject to control actions by a county ag commissioner.
That's a good point. Yeah. So if it's found in a county that's not known to have black fig fly, the ag commissioner can take action in those counties.
And if you have a shipment of figs and they're infested, they could exclude that as well.
Well, thank you. I think we went way over, but we really appreciate it. And thank you.
Just shows how popular you were and what a great message this was today.